Hello, my friends. The story I'm telling you today takes place on October 13, 2018. It's a Saturday. We have a guy, a pilot, rather unfavorably known by the aviation authorities, by the FAA. His name is Raj. He's of Guyanese origin. He's an instructor by profession. He owns 2 or 3 planes. The plane we're interested in today is a Piper Seneca, a twin-engine propeller plane, non-pressurized, which is used for short trips, instructional flights, and things like that. So that day, he's going to take off from an airport that's very close to New York City to go to South Carolina. The distance is about 1,200 kilometers. The nature of this flight, as described in the documentation, is a training flight because he had a man with him who had been the institution's lawyer for 3 years. C from New York, who had come bringing his companion with him, a woman in her early 40s. Now, a number of things don't add up with the training flight. Why? Because this student, who is supposed to fly a twin-engine plane that day, had only done a few hours of flying 30 years earlier. He had done a few hours on a single-engine plane in 1986, and so for this flight, he was supposed to resume his training, which makes no sense because when you resume training, you do it like everyone else, on a PA-28 or on a Cessna 172, but not on a Seneca, not on a twin engine, and not on a 1,200 kilometer cross-country flight. The other issue that also makes this flight highly suspicious is the fact that the instructor was supposed to take this couple to their destination and then return alone. It's not very common for instructors when doing a navigation flight to drop off the students somewhere and return alone. Here we're really dealing with a transport operation. During training, you don't have your girlfriend coming along, and generally, you don't take passengers. A navigation flight doesn't cover 1,200 kilometers. But the most suspicious thing is that this instructor, for example, had issues with the AFA back in 2011, and his license was suspended for 60 days. And he was fined for forgery, for flying planes without the required maintenance, and for endangering the lives of many people. So here we have someone who is very problematic. So probably, I say probably, it wasn't a training flight, but an illegal Part 135 flight. It probably means he was carrying passengers for pay, but disguising it as training. In any case, the Piper Seneca, which he had owned for a few months since June 2018, had a few issues. One of them was that the artificial horizon wasn't working. It was described by pilots who used this aircraft as unreliable. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. And it wasn't replaced. The artificial horizon, since it's a gyroscopic instrument, is generally a bit more expensive than vertical speed indicators, altimeters, clocks, and all that. They're the most expensive instruments. And generally they don't age well. Why? Because they have rotating elements inside. And then when the aircraft is shaken by turbulence, by aerobatics, when the aircraft makes hard landings, all that, well, these instruments suffer and eventually fail. So on older aircraft, it's usually the turn coordinator or the artificial horizon that fails first. In any case, they line up for takeoff. It's a VFR flight under visual flight rules, even though there's a cloud layer starting at 4,500 feet. The aircraft takes off with a requested altitude of 8,500 feet. 8,500, since it ends with 500, we're at a VFR altitude, an altitude used under visual flight rules. So he climbs, he reaches 8,500 feet, and then the controller on his radar sees him go above 8,500. So he gets concerned about it. We ask for 8,500, we stay at 8,500, what is he doing? He contacts him. He says, "You're already passing 10,000 feet, what's happening?" So the pilot explains, "Listen, we have a little problem. We're in the clouds and I'm climbing to get out of the clouds." So the controller insists, "Are you in the clouds or out of the clouds?" "Yeah, well, sometimes we go into them. Sometimes we're in visual flight conditions. We're in VMC conditions. But sometimes we switch to IMC. Sometimes we enter the clouds." okay? But what we want is to climb above them. At that point, the controller says to him, but be careful, I have airliners in the area at 20,000 feet. They're in the clouds. So this idea of trying to climb above them might be a bit risky. Despite this conversation, the pilot insists and continues to climb. 13,000, 14,000, 15,000 feet. The controller will then contact him again and ask, what are you doing? What's happening? Yes, I'm trying to climb, but just between us, I have a little problem. The artificial horizon isn't working. Then the controller tells him, I'm declaring an emergency for you. Because a plane in the clouds without an artificial horizon, right away, you know the day won't be like any other. You know, there's a big risk of injuries. He declares an emergency for him. He starts giving him vectors to take him to an area where apparently there was a bit of a break in the clouds. Yes, but the thing is, he had to reach that area, reach it through the clouds. The pilot, he says, I feel the sun. I feel the sun above the cloud. I want to climb. I'm going to climb. He keeps climbing. He keeps climbing. So there you go. You can imagine a little bit. I'll let you imagine the atmosphere in the aircraft, especially since the people just took off. They didn't even have time to get comfortable. Already we hear the controller announcing an emergency and that things are getting worse and all that. So he keeps climbing. And suddenly he announces, here we are. We've come out of the clouds. We're at 19,000 feet. So they reach 19,000 feet. And up there, it's blue sky. They've come out of the clouds. So the clouds are below. It's all white. It's all closed off. But above, luckily, it's blue sky. So, of course, everyone congratulates each other. That was close. We almost got scared. We almost got worried. Except that another, much more insidious problem is about to arise. When you reach these kinds of altitudes, most of the Earth's atmosphere is below your feet. It's underneath you. The air is getting thinner. The partial pressure of oxygen is low. To go to these altitudes, you either need to be in a pressurized plane, the Seneca is not, or you would need to take oxygen with you, supplemental oxygen. It is mandatory from 14,000 feet for the pilot. It is mandatory from 15,000 feet for the pilot. And for the passengers, it comes in the form of a bottle of pure oxygen. And then you breathe that air, that oxygen, through your nose. So he didn't have any, there was no oxygen, but the controller didn't know that. Nobody knew it at that moment. So he starts flying. And at that point, they're completely trapped. That means that at those altitudes, probably, that's when the passengers start to have some problems. Their heads are buzzing. Some people don't feel well. Some may lose consciousness. Some may experience anxiety, panic, or have trouble breathing. In fact, the pilot isn't immune to this physiological phenomenon either. And it's a physiological phenomenon. So in a way, it's beyond your control. It's not about meditating or a matter of willpower or anything like that. If anything, people like the Sherpas, those who live in high mountains, might have a higher tolerance for these things. But someone who lives in New York, no, not at all. It's not possible. So they have this extremely difficult choice. The clouds below that close off the whole horizon, so they can't go down into the clouds. They don't have any oxygen. And a few minutes will pass that will probably be, for these three people, the longest minutes of their lives. If they had had a working artificial horizon, they could have tried to go through the clouds, descend, that's it. Especially since the instructor was instrument rated. Even if on paper the qualification hadn't been valid for some time, but that's more of an administrative issue than a competence issue. Donc, what are they going to do? They're going to stay for about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes at that altitude. And then suddenly what the controller sees on his radar, he sees the plane making figure eights, looping in the sky. And suddenly, with each sweep of the radar, several thousand feet are lost. It's as if this pilot, literally feeling that he was about to lose control of the situation, that he was about to faint or even starting to faint, well, what he does is push the control stick forward and decides to take his chances through the clouds, probably the only viable option in his eyes. So the aircraft starts descending at 10,000 feet per minute. So it's no longer a controlled descent, but it's literally falling. The people on the ground through the clouds will hear a very particular sound, which they will describe as the sound of an aerobatic plane. You know, when aerobatic planes are operating above your head, you hear that very particular sound of engine speed, of propeller speed that changes very quickly. It's the propeller governor on a constant speed propeller that has trouble keeping the propeller at a constant speed precisely because the air changes direction very quickly and the plane changes attitude. You notice the struggle causes the propeller and engine speed to fluctuate, creating a unique sound. But beyond that noise, there's another one, even more sinister. It's the sound of metal tearing. Because the plane has reached an excessive speed, the red line on the airspeed indicator has been exceeded. And so this caused the aircraft to start breaking up in flight. From that point on, indeed, the chances of survival decreased significantly. We knew that this pilot, the way he worked, was not going to end his career well. We knew very well that one day he would, or rather his family would receive a death notice. But that was the day he comes out below the clouds. And he comes out below the clouds, to be perfectly honest, at an altitude that gives you some hope. They went out at 4,000 feet. 4,000 feet, if you come out of the clouds in a plane, even if it's upside down, right? You still have your chances. A little, 2, 3 small movements with the rudder, the stick, all that, and you've put it back upright. Except that here the damage was done. The aircraft was severely damaged in a critical situation with people who were probably still unconscious or partially unconscious. And what he's going to do is hit the water. He's going to crash off the coast of a small village on Long Island. It had traveled about 100 kilometers since takeoff, and then people saw it fall. The water isn't very deep. When the Coast Guard arrived, they send divers. It's only 5 or 6 meters deep, which makes it easier to recover or retrieve the bodies, as they say. And so the 3 people were killed that day. As the pilot's daughter said when she was interviewed by the media, she said that he died doing what he loved. It's a way of looking at things that can be defended, and it does have a certain nobility. But the thing is, it wasn't an accident. It was more like a flighticide, if we want to invent a word. Because an accident, according to the dictionary, is a bit more unpredictable. An accident isn't already predetermined when you take off. But here, it was clear that this flight was going to end badly that day. In any case, merci d'avoir regardé cette vidéo jusqu'ici. Let me remind you of my latest book, The Titan, a dive that was also bound to end badly. It wasn't that instructor, it wasn't Mr. Raj, originally from French Guiana. It was actually Mr. Stockton Rush, who is an intelligent man, an engineer, Princeton, Ivy League, charismatic. He speaks well, he's reassuring. So reassuring that people paid him $250,000, got into a barrel with him, a cylinder made of carbon fiber, and then they went down to see the Titanic. In their defense, previous clients were able to see the Titanic, even took photos with it. They came out to tell what they experienced. But the clients, the last ones from Dive 88, well, they didn't see the Titanic. They died shortly before reaching it. The story is told in the book The Titan, which you can find on Amazon. Thank you to those who support this channel on Patreon. And I'll see you in the next video.